Welcome to the e-commerce growth show, brought to you by Segmentify.
Thanks very much, Scott, and well, thank you for this. Emmons, I'm gonna call him Emmons just to make it easy now. And we've been hosting this show in North America for about 4 months or 5 months or so, and you know we're always looking for thought leaders like yourself, people who we can pick their brains and have a relaxed chat. So thank you for this, and now I'm going to open the show here and introduce you. I made some notes. So what I was gonna say is that, just for context, Emmons and I, we're like Batman and Robin.
He loves to say that
since last year. So so Scott, you're the partner and president of research and strategy over at Psfk, a leading research and insights and innovation firm that focuses on retail and customer experience. So basically, within the next 30 or 40 minutes, Scott and I would like to pick your brain on, what you guys are seeing in terms of shopping behavior and cover the retail trends for 2021. I always start the show with the same good old question, give us the big picture, and how did you land in the role that you're in today? Just a little bit of your journey, who you are,
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for having me and, thinking of Psfk in this context. I have been at Psfk now for, I should know this number, I think it's 12 plus years. And, over the context of that time, we have researched a lot of different topics, and as the business has evolved, we've found where our sort of sweet spot is. And for us, that is within, we would say retail innovation, customer experience innovation, and, brand innovation, I guess, in sort of all of its forms. For me, I think, I was in some ways, both good and bad. I was a Bachelor of Arts major in college, and I studied English and philosophy, which was great for critical thinking, not great for finding a job once I graduated. And eventually, kind of through hook or by crook, I found my way to Psfk. And I think for me, the thing that has sort of intersected with my interests is that desire to kind of constantly be looking at what's new and interesting, figuring how all that fits together from a sort of big picture point of view, and then trying to contextualize that for whoever the audience is. And I think for Psfk, one of the things that we say is our value proposition is that we always are trying to look for lateral inspiration and then apply that to whoever's asking the question. So if you're in the hospitality space, certainly you can learn from other folks that are doing the same thing, but it's helpful to look at what's happening in retail and what's happening in the wellness space or whatever the case is, and then trying to figure out where the sort of new and next things are happening rather than just following what everybody else is doing. So I'll kind of stop there, and we can continue this conversation.
Well, I'd jump in for just a second and say definitely agree with the lateral approach. I think that the best inspiration, is found outside of kind of your own comfort zone, your own four walls. It was something that I believed in when I was at Neiman Marcus doing innovation there. Obviously, in my time in that role, look to the kind of research that you guys were doing, as well as, the startups and other kind of new technology trends you were discovering and sharing with the world, which, I assume is still a very important part of what you guys do.
Yeah, absolutely. We always are. And it's interesting because with, anytime you're sort of looking at the cutting edge, there's that sort of question about whether just because the technology's there, is the consumer interest there, is the business case there. But, we always kind of preach this idea of businesses needing to be constantly kind of playing at the edges and experimenting anyways. So even if it's, I know you guys did this at Neiman Marcus when you were there, is that sort of experimentation mindset where you look at things on a small scale and then figure out if it's going to be something that's going to resonate more broadly, bringing consumers along as part of that journey, employees, et cetera. So I think that's where those two kind of pieces come together a little bit.
Yeah.
Scott, I'd love to explore a little bit more of your background and maybe learn even a bit more about the company itself. How many employees are you guys today? Because on LinkedIn, I think somewhere around 30.
Yeah, exactly. We're fortunate enough to have the flexibility to be, even before COVID, we were a bit of a distributed workforce, and we have our sort of core competency within the context of the organization where, I think classically we've called the folks that work at Psfk, and particularly in my team, strategists, although I don't know if that's exactly the right, we're toying with this idea of analysts, and trying to figure out how best to kind of, delineate what it is that we do. But at our heart, the core folks that work at Psfk are researchers who then are, doing, we always joke that we're reading the internet every day and then trying to categorize that within our own system and then use that as a foundation for any questions that we get asked. As a business, we kind of do three key things. We have our sort of syndicated research platform where members sign up. There's very similar competitors in the marketplace. We have access to a variety of research reports that sort of look at innovation across the customer journey, across categories, across demographics, maybe a deep dive into technologies. People can ask us on-demand research questions. We bring that to life through an events business. We have an upcoming event in June where we're going to be looking at the omni-channel customer journey. And then we have a consultancy as well where, again, typically we're looking at retail and customer experience innovation, but more broadly, we can go sort of into other areas of interest for companies as well. But that's really where our sort of bread and butter is, I would say.
How's the appetite for retailers and brands to consume your services been through the pandemic? Do you think it accelerated? It stayed about the same, or something different?
I would say it's probably stayed about the same. I would imagine, and my colleague Jeff, who runs our sort of membership side, would know better than I. But I think, we have an audience that's kind of part agencies that support the sort of brands and retailers, and then we have the brands and retailers themselves. I think agencies were hit the hardest probably out of everyone, and so their appetite for sort of having an additional sort of subscription service has probably dipped a little bit, but then we've seen more uptick from the retailers and brand side of things. And then from a consulting point of view, I would say we probably remained steady, if not grew a little bit. Obviously everyone was kind of struggling with the sudden shifts that were happening, and I'm sure we'll get into this in terms of the broader conversation, but, the organizations that had already had a lot of these sort of efforts already underway were the ones that have largely succeeded in the midst of everything. And then a lot of people were trying to play catch up. Obviously that's easier said than done, but a lot of what we found ourselves doing was helping organizations kind of look at their existing strategy as it might apply to, say, a customer journey, try to figure out where their strengths were, where there might be gaps, and where they could potentially even get ahead of some of their key competitors in many ways. So, and I think the conversations that we've been having all are really sort of, omni-channel has been around for many, many years now, but really trying to figure out what that actually looks like. And then specifically for folks who have stores, what role the store has within the context of that omni-channel journey as well.
So you guys are well known for your yearly Future of Retail report. So, I think there, are some things there that are of interest to touch upon, as we chat today. When I was, kind of going through the 2021 content, one of the things you talked about is, kind of define who best-in-class retailer brands, are, the things they do. One of the points that you made was they best-in-class invest in people, systems, and infrastructure, which resonated with me because it felt like when I was with the big brand, back, I left Emmons, by the way, in 2018, but when I was with those guys, that level of investment and convincing kind of new investment, especially in innovation, stuff, was always tough, right? There was only so many dollars to go around, to be honest. So what are you seeing? I would say that it's safe to say that you had, some brands and retailers that weren't investing enough before we got to the pandemic. Then what happened? What do you see?
Yeah, so great point, and thanks for referencing the report. This year is just to provide a little bit more context. This year, we focused on this idea of resiliency or resilience in terms of a sort of mindset in terms of, and I mean, it applies across, not only retail, but just kind of business in general. But I think, the obviously the shock that hit everybody was the fact that, large physical sales largely stopped unless you were an essential retailer. And even in those contexts, things were suddenly disrupted from so many points of view, supply chain disruption. What did that mean for the folks working at the front line, et cetera? And I think with these sort of bigger investments in systems and things that take a long time to implement and then actually see the results kind of resonate from them, it's a harder thing for organizations to kind of go off and do, because it's I was having a conversation with someone talking about the development and implementation of sort of, let's call it a best-in-class mobile app for a well-known home goods company. And from the moment that they started the research to when it was implemented, it was a 2-year journey ultimately. And
I would assume the entire landscape had changed by the time they got to the end.
Exactly. So, this is, there's the best time to start any of these projects is always sometime before you need them, but it's always, things are, to your point, things are always going to be changing along the way. And so I think there's that need for this sort of long-term vision that is flexible, but still has that sort of North Star guiding, but then a lot more of these smaller kind of checkpoints along the way. And, I was having I also teach a class, and I had somebody come in and speak, and he was talking about ecosystems to my class. And he was saying, to sort of build an ecosystem, it takes so many different parts to actually, create an ecosystem. And if you try to just wait until the full thing is done, until you sort of launch that or bring it to the marketplace, then who knows what's going to happen once it sort of hits. And so he was talking about this notion of creating these modules that can sort of exist on their own, but then having the vision to think about how they connect together to sort of create a bigger experience. And I think the same thing holds true whether you're talking about creating an experience for customers, or more importantly, having those sort of foundational elements in place from a sort of business point of view. And I think what we've seen more and more, especially over the past 12 months, is those sort of operational pieces, things like knowing how much inventory you have and where it's available at what places, are not sexy at all. But those, if you don't have those things ready and sort of available, then all the other experiences that you're trying to create as a result of that sort of fall down. And so
it's kind of hard to do BOPUS if you don't know where your inventory is.
Exactly. So so I think for us, it's there's always that rush to sort of like look at the shiny new object and say, okay, we need to now go and roll out a bunch of interactive screens within the context of our physical stores, for example. But what is that really doing from a sort of business point of view? Again, what are you going to put on those screens? How does that change the sort of customer experience, et cetera, rather than thinking about everything that needs to happen sort of before that, which I think is where the transformation actually sort of takes place.
I think that's really good information, and I think that, it's too easy to go get focused on the AI-driven auto delivery robot and forget that if you can't do all the table stakes stuff, then none of the sexy cutting edge stuff is actually possible. And then thinking about some of the things you just said, in terms of modularization of capabilities, and I think a lot of that was about being able to deliver pieces fast and timely, but before they're out of date, at least go try something, an MVP, right, of something. And I think fortunately, right, the not sexy infrastructure stuff, the cloud services, and the ability, to deliver, kind of the IT stuff you have to do a lot of these experiences has gotten more agile, right, and more flexible, as opposed to when I started at Emmons 16 years, in 2003, and everything was out of our data center, and there was a mainframe in the center of that, and any project that required, actual, data services took months, if not years, right? In some cases, depending on what the priorities were, which doesn't work in today's timeline. So there wasn't a question in there. I was just rambling. Sorry about that. Looking at, I'll quickly talk about the other best-in-class features, because I like all of them. That includes extract key insights to guide decisions at every level. Near and dear to my heart. I started at Emmons as a data analyst for the product reporting team, and grew up in retail in the data side of things. And so I'm a big believer that those insights, are what help you drive better relationships with your customers. You also, you guys talk about embracing a culture of experimentation, which certainly goes hand in hand with what I was doing with innovation, and really became my signature career move, was to get into that innovation side of things, and in fact it ruined me, and from being able to actually do regular IT infrastructure stuff after that, because I kind of caught the bug like you did about the trying to figure out what's next, right, and what was the next big thing, and how do we get ahead of the curve with that stuff. So I think good information for your readers that have a look at this report. So one of the things you guys talk about is shopper priorities and the evolution, the accelerated evolution, really, during the pandemic. So we're sitting in a new place today where things are kind of starting to reopen, right? And for fully vaccinated folks, it may be comfortable now to actually go back to the grocery store, as opposed to delivery or curbside, as an example. I think there is pent up demand, and it's not just for retail, right? It's for travel and hospitality, and a ton of stuff that people are just sick and tired of sheltering in place, and this is all going to explode I think. So what's going to happen with all these great new innovations that we came up with during the pandemic, as the ability to physically go places again kind of comes back?
Well, it's a great question. I think just to sort of go back to your original point, like, or one of your sort of early points is, my parents who are in their 70s were downloaded the Walmart app at the sort of height of the pandemic and were doing curbside grocery pickup, and they never would have considered doing that prior. And so suddenly you have, the audience that was already sort of gravitating towards those things before any of this happened. And then a whole host of new folks that, got onto the convenience of shopping online. And so I suspect that we're gonna reach some sort of a balance. I mean, the astronomical rise of e-commerce, I think I was seeing something in the first 3 months, e-commerce sales grew like 33% or something like that. And I can't remember what the, where we're at as a total percentage of sales, but it's, the growth has been astronomical. And, I don't see that fully going back to where it was by any means. I think there is now a bigger appetite than ever, and it just makes it harder for retailers and brands, is that people want the desire to shop in the way that's going to be the most convenient based on whatever it is you're looking to sort of achieve at that moment is more so than ever. So the digital only journey, where you buy things through an e-commerce site, is still going to happen, and the expectation that you're going to get that at your home in one day or even same day continues to grow. I think where the innovation is happening is that what that e-commerce experience looks like and the types of services that people can then offer. I think for us, one of the big things to sort of happen was that sort of hybridized version of, just shopping in general, but in an online context, suddenly you have these interactive elements where you can shop one-on-one with an expert or a virtual advisor in your home, and maybe they're actually sitting in a physical store and they're showing you product, and maybe you're showing them the things that are already in your closet or in your home or whatever the case is. And it creates this really intimate sort of one-to-one connection, which can happen totally online, or it can drive you into that physical store. Certainly, there is also that sort of shift from, let me do 90% of my shopping online, and then I'll get that all set up to be picked up in the store or in a curbside context. And then that 10 or 15 minutes or half hour that I would have otherwise had to browse the aisles, now I have more time in the store to, actually have an appointment or take a class or do all these other things. So I think that's quite interesting to me, is just how saving people time up front can then create a better experience in a sort of physical store environment, and what you can begin to offer there. I think some of that appointment shopping within a physical context is really interesting. Preloading the dressing room or grabbing a few items that that shopper is coming in and interested in looking at, and then having that one-to-one interaction in that context. Then, again, sort of that sort of in-store journey, I think there's going to be consumers who are going to want to kind of have the convenience of the store, but bypass any of the time that they actually spend there. And so the new services that sort of crop up around that, where it's almost like a drive-through experience where you've ordered things ahead of time and then you come and pick them up. As I just mentioned, those folks that want to have a little bit more of that personalized experience, but have done more of the upfront planning of that trip. And then, even sort of thinking about then the way that the store supports all of those journeys from a logistical point of view, which I think now we're seeing is the physical store is now an extension of the digital shopping journey in all ways, but specifically from a sort of fulfillment or logistical point of view, where having that inventory understanding and having the sort of staff available to help pick orders and things like that, and then be that much closer to the consumer so that you can offer these faster, more efficient kind of ways of getting them the product, I think is quite interesting. I still think, I was reading recently, Walmart has certainly been one of the big success stories of the past 12 months, and their single biggest employee growth has happened around what they call their personal shoppers. And these are literally folks who are walking the aisles and picking online orders and getting them ready to either be shipped out or picked up at the store. And that's a completely sort of new way of thinking about the role that the store kind of plays within that journey in some ways. And so, it's a competitive advantage for them, but then also I think, from an employee perspective, I don't know how there's a whole new set of tools and, skills, let's say, that are required to, do that efficiently. And so then it creates that next sort of like, okay, we need X, Y, and Z as a part of this too. So, short answer is things will find a balance, but I think that from a business point of view, the need will be to meet all of these different consumer desires for shopping and do so, and offer best in class around those, which is obviously a challenge.
Yeah. So, and I guess that whole, when we think about the harmonized thing, I use the Steve Dennis term, or that's what I use, harmonized as opposed to omnichannel.
Mm-hmm.
And he pays me a commission every time I use it. So there's that. I'm going to a quick shameless self-promotion. You're the stuff you're talking about digital personal shoppers and scheduling and all this stuff. My current gig at PowerFront, that's what we do, is enable, sell a platform that enables that. So definitely am a believer in that because I'm trying to sell those solutions to retailers. So I think that really was a great place to be, especially during the pandemic. But I don't think it requires a pandemic to be useful, right? That it's what you're saying about the time savings and now that I have the same situation with my mother, by the way, who orders her groceries online and has them delivered and stuff that I never would have believed she would do now, right? Out of necessity. I'm not going back to shopping for staples, right? For that, kind of everyday stuff that you have to replenish and over and over again. To me, what would require a trip to the store is the treasure hunt, right? That's, which is a different kind of shopping. When I don't really know what I want, and I need to go kind of explore what the possibilities are. Even if, whether that's the hardware store or or the boutique, the fashion boutique, whatever it is that I'm looking for. When you think about innovations, that were enablers during the pandemic, like curbside and contactless delivery and those sorts of things, really, it's none of that's new, right? None of that was new stuff at all. So I think you alluded earlier in the conversation that there were some folks that were behind, that had to, sort of speedily figure out how to turn all that on quickly. Who did some things that were truly unique beyond curbside and contactless that you saw?
It's a good question. I think one of the things I was thinking about when you were sort of talking is, in some ways, e-commerce has always been the sort of utility side of shopping, which is kind of what you hinted at. You know, if these are things that I don't really need to think about, maybe I do that, you know, sort of, I know what I want, and so I just constantly am replenishing, or some automated services replenishing things for me. Where physical retail has always excelled is at that sort of emotional and sort of sensorial, let's say, kind of connection, and then obviously the social and things like that. I think there's a big push for brands to start, or retailers to start thinking about expertise within the context of their stores in particular. And obviously, you know, as we just talked about, you can offer that in a digital context as well. But we saw companies like Rite Aid, who is now has sort of gone through a rebrand over the past 6 months or so, is in the process of updating a bunch of its stores. You know, obviously within the pharmacy space, in general, you have the Rite Aids and the CVSs, et cetera, all trying to take a bigger piece of this like wellness, health kind of consumer. And what Rite Aid is doing is positioning their pharmacists at the center of that store experience, which I think is super interesting, and making them more of a core component of the overall journey of a customer. And, you know, particularly in the US, where the healthcare system is problematic at best, to have somebody who's more of a regular touch point for a consumer. And then that's where you can start to bring in some of that data, what you know about them from not only the prescriptions they're taking, but perhaps other health metrics that they might be sharing within the context of a visit or whatever. Then you can start to have more of a value-based and long-term conversation with a customer, which I think is really interesting. REI is another brand that, or retailer that has done some interesting things. They're in the process of trialing a number of new store types that are very focused and localized to, so in Montana, it's all about the ski and snowboard culture. In another market, it might be about bicycling or whatever. And so they have tailored the experiences that happen within the store based on the focus and the merchandise and who that consumer likely is. And I'm sure they've done a bunch of testing to kind of figure that out. And so it's that sort of expert and service focused approach within those stores. And then they too are experimenting with bringing that same experience into an online context. And so again, having these appointments with virtual shoppers and sort of getting them up to speed on the things that they should be thinking about. Obviously, it's a great time to be an outdoors retailer still.
No kidding.
So, you know, they come to mind. I'm trying to think of anyone else that I've read about recently. I'm sure as soon as our conversation's over, I'll have a million others. I think, you know, Beauty Counter comes to mind.
We're seeing huge interest in beauty. Beauty is going crazy, and they've got money to throw at the problem. So
exactly. And so Beauty Counter opened a brand new store in Los Angeles. And they're, again, it's sort of this hybrid experience where they've specifically built a studio within the context of that showroom that can be used by both employees and potentially influencers to broadcast sort of live streams out to an at-home audience. I think the space is big enough that they can host sort of hybrid, so in-person and live stream events at the same time. You know, creates a lot of amazing content and then encourages people to come into the store. And I think to your point, Scott, beauty is quite interesting. And I know, you know, their big challenge is figuring out how to do sort of like testing within the context of the store, and things of that nature. But you
look at things like what Ulta is doing with, you know, they bought Glam Street, and I think they call it Glam Lab now. But you know, they're using that virtual try-on tech, right, as an example.
Yeah. So I think, I think all of these sort of like hybrid experiences are quite interesting to me. And again, sort of recognizing how you, how you can, in the case of some of those experiences I talked about, it's like you have the employee who can sort of be serving, multiple audiences, and obviously you have to figure out how that logistically works, but and that's just creating more value within the context of that store environment. I'm trying to think if there's any who else has done really interesting things.
Well, I will say that the pharmacy example was a really good one. That really, when you started talking about that, I was thinking, yeah, you know what, my pharmacy didn't really have very good customer service until like now, where they notify me and they've done all kinds of things to make it easy to get my stuff and auto refill and stuff that they just didn't do before. It's just better. I thought that was a great example. Yeah.
And Amazon is the big elephant in the room there. I mean, they're trying to, again, take everything about the pharmacy and sort of put it in an online context. So I think all of these brick and mortar pharmacies see that they need to provide more value. And then, again, what's been interesting is because they're now trying to sort of step in and be part of the vaccine rollout, they're getting all this amazing data from people who are signing up, whether or not they were existing customers, they have email addresses, etc. And so they can potentially use that for their shopper marketing and to sort of say, hey, remember us? So they're pretty well positioned. And I think like that health conversation is going to be important for the foreseeable future right now. So
let's. I want to pause for 1 second because I have a weather alarm going off in the other room, which hopefully is not going to bleed over into the audio. But I'm going to go turn it off. We've got thunderstorms we're going to roll through here. So give me a second. They can edit this little portion out, and then I'll be right back. Just take me 1 second.
What time is it in New York, Scott?
It's 1:45 right now.
Right. Yeah. Perfect.
What time?
I'm in
Brazil?
Denmark. I'm actually in Denmark.
So you're in Denmark.
Yeah, I was in Brazil first. Well, actually, I was in Denmark, then I'll back. A quarter
we never know where Carlos is. He's. Yeah. I was pinging him yesterday to ask him some questions about the interview today, and he was like, "I'm asleep," and I was like, "I thought he was in Brazil," and I was like, "Well, are you back in Denmark?" Yeah, so it was like his midnight when I was.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right, back to the episode. What I was gonna do is about. I mean, it's part of the things that you guys are talking about. Maybe try to get to have another angle. The main trends that you're seeing of social brands becoming human, selling. Like we see Brazil, there are some interests that maybe I can also contribute. There's a brand selling chocolate, just stuff, and they're doing a lot of live stream. And they did really well.
Carlos, I'm going to interrupt a second because it's pretty choppy. I don't know if Scott's catching the whole question or not.
Yeah, I'm doing my best to listen in, but it's coming in a little bit choppy for me.
Yeah, your connection is sort of degraded a bit on us, Carlos.
Weird. Better now?
It seems better.
Better? Can you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we got the gist of you were going to look for. You had a chocolate company example that you were going to ask Scott.
Well, yeah. I was going to ask about the trends that you see, Scott, in terms of brands having to be more human. I think that's a global trend. In terms of social selling, it's also not new. Business developed forever, and we've this term social selling was coined by LinkedIn, but it became quite well known nowadays because everyone was either on LinkedIn or having, that this is the only way of selling, right? Live selling, and I wanted to talk to you about some of these trends that you're seeing or that you've seen in the research. So the example I gave is about this chocolate in Brazil, and they've been doing a lot of live selling to survive, and they managed really well. So basically, you can go on their website. There's an area there where you say, well, there's some live here, and then you have the clerk, whatever the seller, making a presentation of the amazing chocolate, new stuff that they have, and he is interacting with the audience. It's quite, I mean, innovative, right? And they managed to survive, and they're doing really well. So I'd like to ask
Carlos,
you about,
is this one to many? Is this live streaming that's your example?
well,
Is
streaming.
it one-on-one, or is it one clerk talking to many customers?
I'm talking to many customers, but you can also
Okay, yeah. So it's essentially the core. The question then is, this live streaming phenomena, that we're now seeing, which is another thing that I sell, by the way. So there's a lot of self-promotion in this interview. But this live streaming thing, especially, once it sort of just knocked it out of the park in China, right? Now the rest of the world's all figured out, oh, we should be doing that, right? So I'm sure you have some insights for us on that, Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. I think live streaming is certainly quite interesting. I think it's still within the context of the US market. It's still trying to figure out exactly, where the right way to do it, how to encourage the biggest audience, etc. I think just sort of digital selling in general, I would say what we're seeing is that businesses now have to look at where their consumers are already kind of spending their time and figure out where best on what platform to sort of encourage that sort of audience and how to engage them in the best way. So certainly social, and then as a sort of subset of that, the live stream piece is quite interesting. I think for businesses that are trying to sort of experiment with that kind of early on, I think that it needs to be super compelling for that audience. And so whether that's a new product offering or a limited edition sort of launch, one of the companies that we've seen that we think is quite interesting is a company called Network that has sort of approached it from we'll bring in influencers from the sort of like streetwear sort of space, and then pair them with a product drop, and then turn this into sort of a talk show format. And so it's kind of combining all of these elements together into a live selling experience. And it's generally speaking, one product or a handful of products rather than a sort of full range. And it's, a specialized enough kind of approach that you're attracting a sort of broader audience. I know that, and the things that I love about live stream is it's that one-to-many context. You have, potentially an influencer, perhaps a celebrity, or maybe even somebody who is, a sort of brand ambassador from within the context of the brand.
Founder, CEO, somebody like that.
Yeah, exactly. Who, provides a lot more information and detail around that product. You can bring in education as a part of that. There's a whole level of sort of interactivity that can begin to happen. If with some capabilities, you can even sort of, again, going back to that beauty space, you maybe can layer in digital try-on and things like that. So, more enhanced capabilities in that context, which I think is quite interesting. The challenge right now is that there's still some education that has to happen around the consumer. it's still a pretty fractured landscape right now in terms of the various platforms and things like that. And so I think it requires a lot of sort of planning and thoughtfulness in terms of making sure that you're going to have the most impactful, let's say, stream and encourage the biggest number of consumers. The other thing that I would say is, I was just reading an article yesterday about Home Depot, who is sort of approaching that from the standpoint of, instead of in a selling context, they're doing it in an education context. So typically at some of their stores, they might offer a workshop that encourages
how to build a birdhouse.
Yeah, exactly. And, from a business point of view, previously they had maybe done 4 or 5 of those across their network of stores over the course of a month. Now, in an online context, they're doing more like 40 or 50. And in terms of their numbers, they're specifically trying to keep them small and interactive. So they're, the article suggested that they get hundreds of people. And I guess in that case, that number doesn't sound like a lot to me, but if it's a high level of interaction and it's sort of maybe tied into a loyalty program or something like that, that's successful for them. And perhaps they can use that content elsewhere. And so I just think, like, with any of these things, there needs to be, realistic sort of metrics or targets that you're sort of looking to achieve. And then, if you want to get 10,000 people, then that way of approaching live streaming is going to be very different than if
That's
you
tough.
want to. Yeah,
it's tough to get 10,000 people, by the way, I can tell you.
Exactly, I'm sure.
So a couple of things we've learned, offering the service, I can tell you that the production values matter, and it's more than just throwing a mobile device and having somebody record themselves selling product. You need to have the right camera angles. It'd be useful to have someone that's operating the camera part of it, as opposed to the actual presenter. Gimbal kind of devices are helpful if you're going to be showing product. Having the right microphone so you can hear the person and not relying on the built-in mic on the device. Those are all critical little things that I think folks that are dabbling in this miss, and so you're not getting the best experience. We were fortunate to have our first big live stream customer be Gucci. So guess what? It had to be perfect and it had to look awesome. So
I'm sure.
We learned a lot by doing that. And then the other thing I'd mention, because you talked about it several times, and that is the size of the audience. It turns out that the live audience is not the critical part of this. It's the ability to make it available for replay. And for the experience of the replay to be as good as the live version, because you'll get most of your audiences on the replay.
Interesting. Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's a good point, because I think, like, the assumption, and I think we're seeing this just more sort of broadly now, is that, even with people's approach to kind of remote work, is this shift towards asynchronous, where, you have to enable there to be collaboration, perhaps in, different time zones and things like that. So I think also people are programmed to sort of want to experience content on the schedule that they want it. And so being able to create a great experience, even if it's not quote unquote live, I think is really important.
So I've got, I'm looking at the clock going, oh my gosh, what happened? Because I've got like 2 or 3 more pages of notes of stuff, I wanted to talk to you about. So we're going to have you back at some point, number one, because there's a lot more to dive into, I think. One of the things, that I ran into when I was doing research, for today's conversation was, I was looking at, some of your thoughts on AI and virtual digital, kind of try-on stuff, because that was something I played with a lot when I was at Emmons. So it's very, of great interest to me. I saw this this product that was called Super Personal that I wasn't aware of. I'd worked with a company called Zkit that did sort of a still image version. And then I saw the Super Personal thing that, looked like, was on like a video image, right? A virtual try on of my head and something that looks like my body, trying on clothes. And I was like, oh, that is cool. Let me go look at that. And their website doesn't function. So do you know what happened to those guys? Because it was amazing.
I thought they were still around. It's interesting because we're doing some work right now for a Silicon Valley company who's interested in understanding 20 years from now what the sort of commerce landscape is going to look like. And one of the things that we're sort of toying around with is this idea that, and this ties in directly to this idea of super personal, is that obviously the challenge for online shopping is that people, especially in a fashion context or a beauty context, you can't try on clothing to see how it fits, how it's going to move, etc. And what Super Personal is trying to do is essentially create digital avatars of individuals that they then can sort of carry through, their shopping experience. And, we're sort of big on that as a sort of tool or a capability or an expectation from consumers that, especially as we kind of begin to, live, especially, maybe not you and I, Scott, but, the younger generations, like living in these
I look the same every time you see me. So if you can if an avatar of me in a black shirt, then you got it down. That's, yeah.
But, as we live in these virtual worlds, then, we have these sort of avatars that, quote unquote, sort of represent us. But, if you can then translate that into a shopping context where we have our lifelike digital avatar that, is how we experience things within a digital context, then why not be able to then, try on clothes or, even like, live in your virtual home and, test out furniture and things like that. Like, I think that's quite far future forward, but it's interesting to consider that as that far flung way of solving some of these challenges, because obviously like the return situation that's happening with, digital purchases and, people getting things home, trying it on, they don't like it, it doesn't fit, whatever the case is. It's a huge cost for
I watch it happen every day here when my wife orders online. I can witness it live because more goes back than stays. That's for sure.
You try multiple, sizes, and then, maybe you keep one, maybe you don't keep any of them. It's, yeah. And yes, to your point, Carlos, like the Ready Player One, it is like this, kind of mirror world of what exists now. I do think to some extent that's quite interesting. And so, that kind of digital twin that exists in the manufacturing marketplace is, I think, has a parallel with, all items to some extent. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of work to get there, but I was reading.
Yeah, I think we're on the, like, especially when you look at the maybe I touched upon Netflix and Disney, and I don't know, when you look at this platform, you think about the commerce future and gaming. We're just talking, right? When we talk about all of that, it's all intertwined somehow, and you add influencers in the mix of that. I think that's how moving forward. Sorry to you.
Yeah, for your future as a digital persona, Carlos, you're going to have to get better internet. That's my commentary on it. So,
perfect. We'll do.
Scott, we want to be mindful of your time. We've been at this for almost an hour now. So I think this is a good stopping point. And like I said, I think there's a lot more of insight you could provide, and so we'd love to have you again down the road when you have a spare moment. And we both, Carlos and I, really appreciate you taking the time today to share some of your thoughts and insights. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott, Carlos, thank you so much. Obviously, I can talk once prompted, so hopefully this was useful, and appreciate you guys inviting me on and thinking of Psfk. So thanks so much.
All right, man. Thank you.
Yes.
Happy Friday. Enjoy your weekend.
Likewise, you guys as well.